The girl is only 14 years old. She discovered that she suddenly had a strange ability. Just read the newspaper news of the murder. She can clearly associate the murder process. And what's even weirder is, she was able to recreate the dumping scene of the deceased out of thin air. Even through chatting with classmates, she actually had a premonition of the murder of a female classmate, despite Zoya's age. But it shows a sense of maturity that contrasts dramatically with peers. So she grew up. She's a crime profiler. Every time the police encounter a difficult case, will need her help to clear up the clues. This time, she just completed the analysis task, narrowed down to 117 suspects to 13. In light of Zoya's outstanding performance, the director gave her another one. More intractable serial murders. Because the killer is extremely perverted. The corpse was turned into an artistic statue, displayed in tourist areas. Zoya got interested again at a glance. She found the thrill of battling her killer.
Super.
Zoya is attracted to this perverted criminal modus operandi in the head, constructing the image of the murderer all the time. Even in the elevator home, she looks at strangers like perverted murderers. Besides, the man opposite was still staring at her. The atmosphere at the moment is extremely tense, so she subconsciously pulled out the anti-wolf spray, as if the murderer will show a hideous face at any time. Fortunately, at the last minute, the elevator door suddenly opened. Then she was having dinner with her roommate. Talk about homicide. The more she talked, the more excited she got. But the next second, I suddenly lost my mind. She fantasized. She became the target of the murderer. And then this kind of weird things started happening. The roommate told her, "Don't know if someone sent her something. It was mailed to the old address by mistake." So she opened it. Why is it a man's old tie? She sniffed sensitively again. Apparently, she's not surprised by this kind of strange thing because of the envelope she received earlier. The drawer is full. But the next day, she suddenly felt threatened again during her morning run. Why was he followed by a man in black again? Nervous, she looked back, and she sped along. Then pick up the stones on the side of the road and stop where they are. Once the man in black approaches, she turned around and smashed. Unexpectedly, the other party ran directly in front of her. It was just a false alarm. Her sensitive nerves were relieved a little, but at night, the more she thought about it, the more wrong it became. Immediately after, the memories of my childhood came to my mind one by one. She seemed to have an ominous premonition. How is all this? It seems to be related to her experience. So she dug out the tie in the drawer. Then it weirdly wrapped around her neck. Pull harder like this. And all of a sudden, she was in a near-death experience. Surprised to see the murderer. Just then, she suddenly received a call from an unfamiliar number.
Алло.
The other party didn't speak at all, but only on the phone. There were strange gasps. However, her hunch may have come true again because of all this. It seems to come from her hands. This extremely perverted murder case. In a dark room, saw a girl sitting at the dining table naked. The man in the hoodie poured her a glass of wine. Then the food was delivered to her mouth. At this moment, apparently fear has taken over the girl's heart and the soft music in the room. It's a kind of weird horror. The girl was too scared to move because her hands and feet are tightly bound with hemp rope. I didn't expect this time. The man walked out of the room. It seems to be going to make some potion. Now the girl has a chance. She immediately broke the rope in her hand with a candle, but she gets nervous. The sound of falling to the ground was just heard by the man, just as she tried to cut the rope on her feet. But suddenly a man is behind him, wrapped around his neck with a scarf. That's all. A young girl lost her precious life. So the next day, the police soon found the girl's body by the river. And that's just the beginning. Under the beautiful and bustling night scenery of St. Petersburg. So the killer fixed his prosthetic nose, and he got out of his car and walked up to the girl who was on the side of the road soliciting business. That's right, another young girl, murdered by a murderer in music. However, after anti-corrosion treatment, the man turned the girl into a doll. You can actually assume any bizarre posture. Then the next step, the killer put the girl in the car again.
Когда ты пойдешь оплакивать наши отношения, я знаю хорошее место.
The man came back to the beach with the girl in his arms. Unfortunately, he actually met a couple walking here. Someone is about to find out. He immediately popped the killing fruit knife. However, what I didn't expect was, the other party walked away without looking at him. Sure enough, the killer's perverted masterpiece at the moment, and it became his artwork. It's because of such a tough case. The police just hired Zoya, a profiler obsessed with crime analysis. Then we brought in Murphy from the Special Operations Service. Cooperate with her. However, the true purpose of the director. But she wants Murphy to be her eyes and ears, report progress at any time. That night, Murphy had a preliminary understanding of Zoya online. Grandpa reminded her, looks like an interesting woman. The next day, she reported to St. Petersburg, then immediately participated in the police team meeting. Original. The first victim was an art student. Due to the anti-corrosion treatment, it is impossible to determine the incident of his murder. The skin of the corpse is orange all over the body, but only the left foot has obviously turned black. The medical examiner believes that he has been dead for more than 5 days. The cause of death was strangulation by the neck. And in the bathtub of her apartment, traces of embalming were found on the body. The second victim was even more bizarre. They found her standing there, tied to the bridge. The cause of death is the same as the first, just on one leg. Found traces of body painting. Forensic judgment based on skin color. 2 cases. The killers used different preservatives. No trace of DNA was left on the body. And this is really unfortunate. There were no witnesses at the scene. The surveillance video just happened to be broken for some reason. Fortunately, the police hired a doctor of criminal psychology. This narrows the scope of the suspect's investigation. However, when Murphy met this so-called doctor, only to find she's just a visionary who is good at talking on paper. Such people can handle the media well. Murphy wants to really solve the case. The doctor's theory is of no use at all.
Окей. Давайте дождемся доктора Волгину. Уверен, у нее найдутся более убедительные аргументы.
Just think about the image of the killer. She could be at the scene of the murder, as if she had become the victim. Being strangled from behind, can't breathe. But what's even weirder is, she actually recreated the dumping scene of the deceased out of thin air. So this is 14-year-old Zoya. She always paid special attention to the bad news in the newspapers, chat with friends, inseparable from the topic of bloody murder. She even reported on all the murders. It's an alarm. She was sure that more people would be killed, and the murderer is likely to reappear at the crime scene. So she went to the river by herself, once again verified her strange abilities. But just as she was about to leave satisfied, she actually saw the shadow hidden behind the tree. She thought it was just a subconscious hallucination. But I didn't he expect? Then suddenly came a familiar voice.
Zoya.
It was rustling from the garage. Zoya's nervous mood calmed down a little. However, her next question, but got an extremely strange answer from the other party.
Ты сегодня не работаешь?
У нас на работе сегодня смешная ситуация произошла. Пожар случился.
Maybe it's because she's naturally suspicious. Is rustling? Is it the murderer who comes back to appreciate the masterpiece? This doubt has been bothering her at night, but she was still puzzled. In a trance, she seemed to have entered the murder scene again. However, this time, she was walking alone down an empty street. But behind her, don't know when a man in black followed, and she quickened her pace. Unexpectedly, the other party actually followed and ran, and the terrifying footsteps got tighter and tighter. But she turned around again, but found that the figure suddenly disappeared. Just when she thought she was hallucinating again, the man in black suddenly covered her mouth. Then he dragged her into the woods with brute force. In the blink of an eye, the murderer showed the fruit knife of the crime. However, the picture changed. People under pressure. She suddenly became the woman she grew up with. Unexpectedly, the murderer had already cut her wounds by now. It was all a dream. Zoya obsessed with solving cases. Right now, she's on a plane to St. Petersburg. She was woken up by this big brother on the list with unreasonable ideas. After getting rid of the typical scum, the Aeroflot plane also wobbled to the ground. She finally meets her serial killer partner, Murphy. Didn't expect the two to just chat about the case. Murphy just started complaining about the shit experts here. And Zoya only experienced this person's fame on TV. But at the group meeting at the police station, she really learned the bullshit ability of experts. When you hear experts say the murderer was probably working at the funeral home, Zoya's temper came up at once. She simply retorted that the rotting feet of the corpse. How do you explain that? Murderer, just an amateur in embalming. And she's experimenting on each of her victims.
Псевдоэксперты слетаются на громкие дела, как мухи на дерьмо. Сбивают всех с толку и порождают массовую истерию. От них один вред, капитан. Доктор Сафразьян как раз такая муха.
Unexpectedly, the women of the fighting nation are really fierce. But then, Zoya actually refuted Murphy's proposal again. She thinks the murderer will never return to the scene to enjoy the thrill of murder because the crime scene has no direct connection to the killer's fantasies, and strict prevention and control is a waste of police resources. Didn't expect it to be at this moment. The team received another call to the police to find a third body, so Zoya followed Murphy to the scene quickly. The girl posed as a thinker immediately came into view. Soon the forensic doctor at the scene made a preliminary determination. The victim was strangled like the others because there is still a deep blood stain on the neck. But Zoya noticed the victim actually had a ring on his hand. No jewelry was found on the first two victims. Then, she also based on the sun exposure marks on her skin and speculate the deceased should have been a happy worker. High-risk groups, often the main target of serial killers. So the next second, Zoya visited a famous funeral home in St. Petersburg again. Under her charming smile and adulation, finally got help from the funeral home owner. The many puzzles in her heart have also been answered. It turns out that the decay of the legs of the deceased, it's because the murderer's technology is not up to standard. He didn't have the patience to massage the corpse's blood vessels, or he is not the standard. When he stirred the embalming liquid, accidentally leaked onto the left leg of the corpse. In addition, the murderer also failed completely because for the sake of beauty, the embalmer had to put the mouth of the corpse. Suture, but the corpse kept its mouth open. Pay attention to the expression of the deceased. The deceased looked very surprised, even afraid. After a while, through the patient explanation of the embalmer, Zoya also has a criminal mentality towards the murderer. Have a certain understanding. Wait until you get back to the police station. She learned that the captain was following the directions she was pointing. They quickly found the victim's roommate, so the three quickly launched an investigation. Finally, they found out that the third victim was not using drugs, also very friendly, and with almost everyone she knew, can get along well. However, the deceased never wore a ring, nor a yellow shirt and a brown polka dot skirt. Also, the roommate remembers. There's a guy with tattoos all over his body. No one dares to get in his car. So far, the case has finally made a little progress. Zoya also organizes her thoughts at night. She seemed to have entered the world of murderers again. This person must have been looking for prey before. He has carefully disguised his whole body, and the pretty girl the murderer killed. After years of accumulation, countless. Just then, Zoya's phone suddenly received a message. She turned on the screen. It turned out to be the crime expert who was pissed off by her. The other party also sent an urgently made video. The content is actually the process of the whole meeting. And it ended with a facelifted oral narrative.
Многие так и ходят, как во сне. И они не понимают, что все взаимосвязано. Все хотят быть уникальными.
Because girls keep getting killed in small towns, Zoya often imagines her as a victim, so as to understand the murderer's murder method and criminal psychology. And here's what's even more incredible. She actually had a premonition of the death of her classmate. Later, at a classmate's funeral, she actually locked up an alleged offender to validate her judgment. She rushed to her classmate's house to check the information online because she found out the characteristics of a schizophrenic killer. It's very similar to a boy she likes. This is Ruslan from the garage because Ruslan was always kind enough to ask her how she was doing and always asks her parents for something to eat. He even left the keys to her house. More doubtful is Ruslan also went to the murder scene, and often those perverted serial killers will return to the crime scene to indulge in his murderous pleasures. The more Zoya thought about it, the more certain she became. But the mother didn't want to hear her terrible thoughts. In light of the recent serial killings, only let her stay at home honestly is the safest. But she saw that her mother had just left. She took the keys that Ruslan had left in her house, and there was no one around. I actually secretly opened Ruslan's door, because instead of just guessing intuitively, might as well come directly to the suspect's house. Looking for evidence? She was driven by this powerful curiosity. You have to test her intuition. However, there doesn't seem to be anything suspicious here. It's just in the drawer, found to body sketches. But she looked under the bed again, but made a new discovery. Why are there still women's clothes on the ground? Pulling out a showbox under the bed, but found that there were some gold and silver jewelry inside. And what's even more suspicious is there was also a blood-stained one in the box. Women's underwear. Just then, only heard the sound of the door opening suddenly coming from downstairs. Zoya hurriedly put the things back in place. Then he walked downstairs lightly. It turned out that Ruslan went home early for some reason. Now Zoya is panicking. She wants to sneak out while the other party is changing clothes. It was almost discovered. It seems that the door downstairs cannot be left. She just slipped into the bedroom. Just run to the balcony and hide. Can go here. She found out again. Why is Ruslan in the backyard with coffee again? Fortunately, the other party didn't he look up at her. Then I carefully walked across the roof. Then he jumped safely down the eaves to the ground. She thought. So UV got out of trouble unnoticed. I didn't expect to just walk to the door. She was found by Ruslan, who happened to be out of the house. Hi. What are you
А ты что
doing
здесь
here?
делаешь?
Zoya was flustered and at a loss. She actually made up an excuse that even she didn't believe. Preventing. Fortunately, a neighboring ant passed by, finally broke the weird awkward situation at the moment. She hurried to take 2 steps quickly, follow up without looking back. From now on, such a past often appears in front of Zoya's eyes. And now the psychopathic serial killer she meets. It's like the unsolved serial murders of her childhood. There was a strange coincidence that seemed familiar. However, this time, in different parts of the city, one after another, female bodies were found. And they've all done almost professional anti-corrosion treatment. And here's what's even weirder. The deceased was also clothed. Also posed as a symbol of some kind of power fantasy. What is the criminal psychology of the murderer? Little did you know this headache. Been bothered. The 3-person team that has no idea yet. I didn't expect them to have a breakthrough the next day. The captain actually found it. Data from the Department of Animal Control and Protection reports over the past 2.5 years, there are 27 cases of embalming animals. More coincidentally, all dead animals. They also assumed an unnatural posture. Did the murderer first use animals for embalming experiments? Because the police don't notice hunters at all. Although this is just a guess. It's good news for Zoya to solve the case. Then, during the meal, she can't help but start to fantasize again, reasoning about the murderer. I didn't expect this time. She was strangely imagining lying in bed with Murphy and each other through a series of interval inference of the time of death of the victim. She came up with the conclusion that the murderer is likely to commit another crime within 3 days.
Или мы уже опоздали?
Картошку пересолили.
Что?
Картошку опять пересолили.
Он снова скоро убьет.
At this moment, Zoya suddenly realized, next victim, probably still happy workers, but only the first deceased. But an art student. Now is the time to talk to her classmates. Then Zoya and Murphy went to the house of the deceased's best friend. They actually found something here. Before the victim died, she actually has an ex-boyfriend who has been dating for 2 months. And the ex-boyfriend is actually the current boyfriend of this best friend. And the deceased was preparing to change apartments before his death, because the landlord is a disgraceful jerk. Obviously, these clues are very confusing. Zoya started fantasizing again. The suspicious relationship between the deceased and the couple. That night, she came from thousands of among high-risk groups who engage in happy work. Screened out the killer's next target. Then tell the assistant to call one by one according to the list. And just as Zoya had expected, now in the enchanting night of St. Petersburg, a beautiful young girl being targeted by the man in the car. She fits the age profile perfectly between 19 and 25, and the whole body is smooth, without the slightest tattoo or piercing. Still soliciting business alone. She's obviously a prime target for a serial killer.
Можем заехать, купить тебе одежды, как у моей бывшей. Ты можешь оставить ее себе.
Но это будет стоить дороже.
Договорились.
That's all. The girl rashly got into the car of a strange man, but she wouldn't have thought of it anyway. Tonight, it will be her last day on Earth. Soon the car drove farther and farther. She couldn't help but start to worry and get scared. But when she heard there would be more tips, for the sake of money, she's still tempted. However, in the following process, she has already been embalmed by the murderer, just like a doll, about to become a human specimen. But this time, it was more sudden. The murderer quickly revealed the murder weapon without saying a word. Then he put gloves on her, and they chained up. He also put a torture device on her mouth. But when the murderer was about to make an antiseptic potion, and they just ran out of ingredients, so he had to take off his protective suit. Then he drove out in a hurry. He didn't expect that at this moment, the phone in the kidnapped girl's bag suddenly rang. Only then did she realize the hope of life. She stretched out her feet desperately. She actually hooked her phone in front of her. Fortunately, this call is from the police investigation one by one, but now she can't speak. Can make a humming sound into the phone, so Murphy said all the letters one by one in order. Just spell the words for the kidnapping site. The police will arrive at the scene as soon as possible to rescue. With this approach, they quickly spelled out the first 3 letters. We've narrowed down the list of streets as well, but when they were further investigating the address, unexpectedly, the murderer suddenly came back. although the phone is still ringing. However, but only the desperate screams of the kidnapped girls were left.
Ты меня слышишь? Черт, разъединилась.
She's a profiler who can sense psychopathic murderers. Not only does she have a bizarre ability to reason hypothetically, and in the quirks of probing the murderer, find clues. Now she has never been so close to a murderer. She walks slowly to the van, suddenly stopped. The murderer in the car has begun to be uneasy. This is a scene of Zoya and a serial killer. The contestant gained psychology because the police were just one step away. You can log the exact location of the kidnapped girl. It's a pity that it's still one step late in the end. Although the girl unfortunately lost her life, but it also caused great psychological pressure on the murderer. Due to insufficient corrosion treatment time, he's so impatient that he's going crazy. In addition, the address of the embalming room may have been exposed. He can only transfer the body to the car. Who would have thought that the police had quickly blocked the relevant road sections? Didn't he expect the profiler who's been chasing her, standing in front of the car? The result is just a little bit worse. The two passed by perfectly again. And in the next investigation, the police couldn't get in his car, find the girl's body.
Там что-то протекло.
Я знаю. Извините за беспорядок.
The murderer left calmly. But where did the murdered girl go? Soon, the next morning arrived. The police finally found the murdered girl under the bridge. Looking at the tragic dumping scene, Zoya started to have fantasies again involuntarily. I saw a car stop in front of her eyes. Take a closer look. It was him. Why is it Ruslan, the murderer suspected since childhood, are today's perverted maniacs? The same person as the murderer many years ago. And what's even weirder is, Ruslan actually walked towards Zoya. At this time, Zoya's surface was calm, but the heart is already terrified.
Мальчик, открой дверь. Я просто хочу поговорить. Открой дверь!
It turned out that the person knocking on the window was his partner Murphy. Then Zoya sat quietly beside the deceased. Now she can be sure. The deceased was killed by that perverted maniac. And she's already looking for her next victim. Zoya felt the ominous premonition she had when she was a child again. She had a premonition that the female classmate had been killed, and convinced that Ruslan was the murderer. But when she told the sheriff everything, she inferred, but got a surprising answer.
Точно не он.
Откуда вы знаете?
It turns out that the female classmate was killed. It just so happens that Ruslan has an alibi, and as many as 78 people can testify against him, even the sheriff. Also with him in the search for the missing classmate. Zoya was speechless, but she still believed in her weird intuition. However, the next scene, but it made her start to doubt life. In order to appease the mother, who is always worried, the father actually asked the police, who basically confirmed the real murderer.
Ладно. Больше никому ни слова.
Я могила.
Семен Рогов.
Zoya was stunned at the moment. Why is that cowardly male classmate? Could it be that she was bullied and became evil? Then how can the Black Hand reached out to unrelated female classmates? The sheriff explained to his father. The murderer follows the female classmate like a tail every day. And the most outrageous thing is, the girl was found not only naked, he even wore a dark gray tie around his neck. From now on, father no longer believed Zoya's strange idea and told her to stay at home honestly. The adults of the town have organized a plenary meeting to catch the murderer. But that night, when only Zoya and her sister were left alone at home, then suddenly came the sound of the door opening. The sisters thought it was their mother who came back. But Zoya went out of the bedroom to take a look. Why did Ruslan sneak in? In an instant, the air in the whole house is filled with terrible fear. She hurriedly locked the door. Then he impulsively moved the table to block the door. She worries that it's not safe enough. Hastily moved the bookshelf down against the table. At this moment, Zoya is extremely excited, but Ruslan outside the door just wants to talk to her kindly. But despite the patient explanations, but she just wouldn't open the door. So in desperation, Ruslan still chose to leave in silence. The sisters are still undecided, but Zoya heard that there was no sound outside. She was just about to open the door to check. Suddenly, she was hit under the table by a brute force. Saw a terrifying black hand sticking out through the crack of the door. It turns out that Ruslan didn't leave at all. At this moment, he also showed his hideous face and continued to describe the details of the crime in a perverted manner to stimulate Zoya.
Тебе понравится, малышка.
Then he started banging on the door like crazy. Zoya immediately opened the window, called out to neighbors for help. But the adults in the town have already gone to catch the murderer. But fortunately, the old lady finally heard the voice and called the police in time. And Ruslan already felt that he couldn't succeed, so he ran away in a hurry. The sisters breathed a sigh of relief. Not long after, the town has regained its former calm. It turns out that Ruslan mysteriously disappeared that night. He also carefully cleaned up all the traces in the house. No one believed he was a psychopathic murderer. Rumor has it that Zoya's madness scared her away, and the police arrested the poor male classmate. Just closed the case in a hurry. But Zoya always had a doubt in her heart. How did Ruslan invent an alibi? From now on, Zoya started receiving envelopes in the mail, but she opened it and looked inside. It turned out to be the dark gray tie used for murder. And now the ties she received are full of drawers. There's kind of a law underlying this. Is every necktie used to kill? Does it all represent the life of a young girl? And the same bridge that pays homage to the dead girl. A reporter also happened to find a weird envelope. Then he found Zoya as a fan and offered the envelope with both hands. He wants to trade it for some updates on serial killers, coupled with fake expert spoof videos going viral. If you can't meet his little request, he could have smeared Zoya's reputation with negative coverage. When Zoya opened the envelope sent by the reporter, she has guessed. It's a tie that represents the murderer's successful murder. Then at the police investigation meeting, people were complaining. Evidence investigation is like looking for a needle in a haystack. At this time, everyone can only hope that Zoya's analysis of the murderer, but he's still just a vague outline of his personality. Therefore, the sheriff became dissatisfied with Zoya's progress, and they just sort of hastily arranged the work. The meeting ended. However, on their way back to the hotel, Zoya and Murphy, she finally said it because she wasn't sure. The past that cannot be mentioned at the meeting. Now this psychopath and the murderer in the small town many years ago. Maybe it's the same person. She also left the body on the public waterfront. But after the police arrested the male classmate, he actually hanged himself in the detention center. And the killing stopped. But the stupid Murphy. But no connection was found between the two.
Малыш, может быть, я не вижу всей картины.
Не называй меня малыш.
In fact, both of them have a good feeling for each other, but lost all interest in this annoying serial murder. So Zoya drank the stuffy wine. She wanted to just knock on Murphy's door under the influence of alcohol. But in my mind, the image of the murdered girl resurfaced. And now, a dangerous sense of self has never been stronger. However, she didn't expect the next second. Murphy knocked on her door and brought dinner and beer. Apologies for being rash today. When she learned Murphy's grandfather has been missing for several days, let the other party go back and have a look, because she thinks the murderer may have gone into hiding. At the same time, the captain also put the two on the bench. Just one day doesn't change anything.
Тогда
Looking at the charming Murphy at the moment, Zoya can't help but fantasize again. It's just a beautiful fantasy. The next day she tried again, pulled up all murder records for the previous 3 years. She actually found a 21-year-old deceased, and the cause of death happened to be strangulation, and no alleged offender has been found. Then she found out that the body had been dismembered. There were also no DNA samples left at the crime scene. If we assume that the murderer happens to be the same person as this case, then he must have been after this. Just thought of anti-corrosion technology. Zoya thought of this. She already had further plans in mind. So in Murphy's absence, she started a personal investigation. She first found the fiancé of the 21-year-old female deceased. After talking for a long time, left a picture of Ruslan. Then she found the best friend of the first deceased in this case. But the girl is drinking alcohol for her boyfriend's night away. Unfortunately, after she left the photo, went to meet the journalist who was blackmailing her.
Я подарю вам эту историю. Обещаю. Но вы не станете ее публиковать, пока я не разрешу. И за мной останется последнее слово.
Finally, she took a taxi, came to the scene of the female classmate's murder. Here she actually saw Ruslan rides happily with her female classmates. Then to the beach. She also sensed the intimacy between the two as if no one was around. However, the next second, Ruslan pulled out the dark gray tie. Immediately after, killed the shocked female classmates. Unexpectedly, Zoya just turned her head. She actually saw Ruslan standing in front of her eyes, and she immediately realized it wasn't a hallucination. After many years, Ruslan is finally here. Zoya sees this. She ran for her life, but Ruslan is chasing after her. However, it didn't take long. She was thrown to the ground by the other party flying. Then she was pressed under him.
Сука, только пикни. Я тебе глотку перережу.
perverted Ruslan, forcing Zoya to come to the spot where she killed, then order her to kneel. If there is no accident at this time, she's about to die here. As Ruslan pulled out a dark tie, Zoya suddenly pounced on the stone in front of her. She actually smashed the opponent's head with a bang, but when she still wants to fight back, but was suddenly stabbed into the shoulder by the opponent's knife. At this moment, both sides have been seriously injured, but the women of the fighting nation are so fierce. She actually pulled out the knife stuck in her shoulder. She flew into the opponent's thighs again. Zoya's eyes are full of determined, ferocious light, as if to suggest, why don't we end it now? And Ruslan can't take any advantage at a glance. He dragged the stabbed leg and limped away. Zoya, the profiler, fights to the death with the killer from 20 years ago, finally escaped death, and she was taken to the hospital. But now her brain is racing, still reviewing the whole process of the whole incident in the hallway of the hospital. Just had a day off. Murphy, the investigator who caused the accident, also arrived in time. Come back and guard the door. Fortunately, Zoya's body is fine. Only then did his nervous nerves ease slightly. But as soon as he sat down, he fell into a memory. On a mission to catch a suspect 3 years ago, he killed him in a hurry. Then he actually found out that they had arrested the wrong person. This is also where he was taken from the front line, the root cause of transferring to an investigator. Just then, the head of the police in St. Petersburg came over. Only then did he know the whole story of Zoya's attack. It turned out that Zoya had just gotten out of the taxi at that time. Then another car followed. As she walks towards the beach, the killer is hanging right behind her, but the taxi driver didn't care. He thought it was a young couple. What about a secret date at the beach? But after a few minutes, he saw the man come out alone. The driver went to the beach out of curiosity, just happened to save Zoya. The captain was stunned. Why is there another serial killer? Therefore, after the fact, the police in St. Petersburg don't want to continue working with the two of them, in addition to the media's special attention to Zoya. So the director put Murphy on mandatory leave. However, this serial murder case where everything seems to be in chaos, but they made great progress during their vacation. Zoya, who was discharged from the hospital, was lucky. She was comforted and cared for by her friends, and Murphy, but became interested in the case analysis she wrote at the age of 14. Therefore, the tie with the envelope finally surfaced. There are a total of 11 envelopes here. Originally, Ruslan mailed a total of 14 ties. Zoya gave the first one to the town sheriff, and we got no response. When she worked with the police SK personnel, she took another one and gave it to the senior investigator. But the other party, instead, let her deal with her personal psychological fears. So she burned the third strip in a fit of rage. But the tie has not been broken since then. She started collecting them all, and did DNA and fingerprint identification at his own expense. Still no clues. But what creeps her out is, there was something in the envelope, sketches depicting her being violated. So no one believes the murderer Zoya identified, because Ruslan has an alibi. Even the sheriff was on the same search and rescue team as him. Even her father can testify against him. So she suspected that there were either two murderers, or Ruslan sneaks away during the search. After killing, he returned as if nothing had happened. However, this is the same as the case of the embalmed female corpse in St. Petersburg today. What's the connection? And then Murphy said what he thought. That Ruslan. He must have seen the video of Zoya being spoofed online. This aroused his long-suppressed perverted interest. And the killer who embalmed the body. It must be someone else's talent, right? Maybe this time. It just so happens that Zoya's intuition is wrong.
Одержим тобой, в этом нет сомнений. Ну и ты одержима им.
Murphy stopped arguing at a glance. He grabbed the file and walked out the door. Subsequently, he drove to the town where Zoya lived. When he talks to the local sheriff, only then did we learn more details of the case. It turned out to be forensics. The time of death of the female classmate, it's between 6 p.m. and 7 p.m. The suspect is in the library until 4 p.m. But the disappearance of the female classmate was clearly at 2 p.m. But the sheriff thinks the girl must have gone on a date with her boyfriend at that time. But when she was going home, but was tricked into a hidden corner by the suspect, and she was assaulted and killed there. Murphy was even more puzzled. Why didn't this boyfriend appear in the file? Immediately after, he found clues again in the forensic examination date. Since the day the body was found, then why sign the date? But 2 days after the victim's death, what secrets are hidden here? But the sheriff was only concerned with finding the murderer. He knows nothing about the forensic process. The screen changes. Murphy urgently founded the medical examiner from that year. Ask each other, why is the preliminary judgment time at 2 o'clock? And in the end, time changed it to between 6 p.m. and 7 p.m. But the suspect happened to be in the library at this time. Then the cowardly male classmate was wrongfully imprisoned, hanged himself to the extreme. Therefore, his parents have to try their best to prove his son's innocence. That's why the medical examiner changed the times.
И вы знали, что у Семена было алиби?
Вы же знаете, в какой стране мы живем.
Murphy finally confirmed Zoya's inference. So the next day, he brought a large bag of delicious food to Zoya's house again. It turned out that the police initially blamed the male classmate for the murder, so they convinced the ME to change the time of death. It seems that Zoya may have made a small mistake this time. This psychopathic serial killer, as Murphy speculated, somebody else. Then the two ripped off the bedroom. The wall is full of clues that disrupt the mind. Then head straight for St. Petersburg. But this serial killer made girls into dolls. Is it just for fun? But why did you abandon them in the end? A girl wears a date dress. And a girl wearing a bride's ring. It's like the killer is simulating. The whole process from love to marriage is the same. And the whole embalming process is filled with dirty blood. Then wash the body thoroughly. And finally, a very clean coat. But why are these clothes? They all fit eerily. That's not because the victims were skinny at all. And it must be the murderer with the victim. Went to the mall together.
Поближе к конечной точке.
This is just as Zoya speculated. The killer has started looking for his next beautiful prey, but he was tired of those frivolous young girls, but turned his attention to a single mother who takes care of her children alone. Apparently, the killer also aspires to get married and have children. She looked at the warm family in the house, have begun to fantasize. 3 dolls are having dinner with him, but it's not just the freaks. He also wants to take the child, quietly placed on the bed, and under the gaze of his mother, like a father, tell 2 children bedtime stories about saints. So it seems Zoya doesn't have much time left to solve the case. Therefore, the two asked all the malls that were open late, but still nothing. However, there is no way out. Zoya suddenly realized the clothes displayed on the model, actually wearing the same dress as one of the victims. The same, and then at Zoya's prompt, the lady boss finally remembered. There really is someone who always stares at the model in a daze. Then they looked further into the surveillance footage. Unexpectedly, the killer finally revealed the true face of Mal Lu. But unfortunately, the surveillance never caught his face at all. Fortunately, after continuing to track, they finally saw the killer's car. Soon Murphy was analyzing the images from his colleagues. Finally found out the owner's address. Here is a dilapidated wooden house, but the owner doesn't seem to be at home. The neighbor said the owner had been dead for 2 months. She is not a normal person, drinking and smoking all day. She kept cursing at her ex-husband. This led to her daughter, being only 13 years old, died of lung cancer. But what I didn't expect was, back then, she actually said that her daughter was sick and fell asleep. She also told the 2 brothers not to forget to feed them. Now one of her sons hates his mother to death. Changed last name. The other seems to have started a plumber's business. It's a pity. The old man can't even remember the names of the 2 brothers.
Звали его...
Кирилл.
Точно!
Mentioned this name. A person immediately flashed into Zoya's mind. That was 3 years ago. The fiancé of the 21-year-old female deceased. From this, Zoya concluded that mother's death. Just the right moment to trigger the killer's attack. Remember the dubious point described by the first deceased's girlfriend?
Там беда, сырые стены и плесень.
Один раз был вообще такой потоп, что просто рисунки по полу плавали.
This just shows that the murderer had repaired the victim's sewer, and the suspect seen in the surveillance. It is also precisely the same as Zoya's profile characteristics. Exactly the same. In addition, she repeatedly listened to the recording of the victim's phone call for help, in vague words. Also, seems to be repeating a word. When Zoya went alone to investigate, and it turns out there were a couple of vans in the factory. However, there is another suspicion that does not match. Because after the fiancé moved the less heavy goods, he actually started to have back pain immediately. So how did he move the corpse with these? Besides, he was already engaged to the deceased. That leaves only one possibility.
Брат. А что, если его брат тоже сантехник? У Кирилла есть работник. Он убил невесту брата. Дождался, когда Кирилла точно не будет дома.
Just like this, the 2 of them said a few words. Finally pinned down the alleged offender. Then they found the fiancé again. When she heard that her brother was the murderer of her wife, man finally can hold back.
Часто пропускал ваши рыбалки. Почему он не поехал с вами, где он был всю ту неделю, когда пропала Вероника? Вы его вообще видели? Спорю, что он не появлялся целую неделю. Где он, по-вашему, был?
The man is completely devastated because Zoya has already guessed. The younger brother once had sex with his fiancée, and the younger brother happens to have the key to his house. At the same time, Murphy also reminded, the dead are likely to come from the factory's customer list. Unexpectedly, this conjecture was soon confirmed, and now my brother happens to be out visiting clients. So the three urgently searched the list. This is the name of a single mother, right in front of their eyes. They guessed right. At this point, the murderer has knocked on the customer's door, when a woman signs without warning. He leaned up ferociously from behind, then suddenly grabbed the woman's neck. Unexpectedly, the woman grabbed the ballpoint pen and stabbed it in the past, but suddenly she was pressed to the floor. The woman finally broke free, but just now she was about to run for her life with her son in her arms, but found that the daughter had been controlled in the arms of the killer. On the other side, it was already night when the two arrived. Murphy asked Zoya to stand guard at the door and wait for police rescue. He climbed up the wall quietly by himself. Then he saw the two children who were kidnapped. Then he continued to search inside. He did meet the serial killer who was taking hostages. To save a woman's life, Murphy can only put down the gun obediently as required.
Успокойся, успокойся.
Отбрось пистолет подальше.
Despite Murphy's repeated good words, but the killer was emotional. Keep yelling. Just then, Zoya quietly appeared behind her. Now the killer is even more excited. However, the next scene, even the battle-hardened Murphy was stunned. Only see, Zoya kept appeasing the killer with gentle words. And to show that she wasn't carrying any weapons, she actually took off her coat in public. Then say yes, swapping places with hostages, and will also take the initiative to get into the van with each other. She can also handcuff her hands with Murphy's handcuffs. If sincerity is not enough, she even took off her pants. Under Zoya's provocative words, I didn't expect it. The killer's training of thought has been brought back to fantasy. At the crucial moment, Zoya, who worked hard, finally made her last move. When Murphy handcuffed her hands, also saw the pistol pinned to her waist.
Тебе и мне будет кого любить. Давай уйдем вместе. У нас еще есть время.
That's it, a serial killer. Finally caught by Murphy. The hostages were finally rescued safely. Zoya breathed a tense sigh of relief. Afterwards, she actually became a celebrity through the news media. Even her friends came to take pictures with him. And the big reporter offered another olive branch.
Хотел поговорить о книге. Книгу о докторе Зои Волгиной. И предлагаю вам сделать это вместе.
Zoya's relationship with Murphy. It also became inexplicably ambiguous, and the director is also considering recruiting Murphy. Enter the task force. However, this seemingly perfect ending, but it set off the never-ending waves again. Zoya received another anonymous envelope. It still contains an old tie. In addition to that, there is even a photo of a friend and Ruslan. So far, suspense thriller Russian drama. The first season of The Heart of Evil has ended. The play is adapted from by Mike Ormer. Zoe Bentley, the detective novel series will stay with me forever. Interested partner. You can also check out her other two books, In the Dark and Through the Eyes of the Victim. If I were to see a TV series made in my lifetime, the editor will also be the first two. Brilliant commentary for everyone. If you like this appearance and scale, are all super Russian dramas. Invite friends to order a small subscription. There are also many good-looking drama commentaries on the homepage. There will always be one that will enter your heart. See you in the next story.